animation to love.
Great. I'm going to ask you guys, I'm going to open up with this one question. Now, you guys actually met on Regina Trips, and you got married less than a year ago, right? Or last September.
Yep.
And so the number one question I want to ask you is, when you guys went on this trip, did you feel any pressure whatsoever to go on this trip to date or at all? I mean, was there any of that sort of overhang to the tone of the trip?
Not at all. I went because a priest we knew was going to be the priest traveling with the group, and invited my brother and sister. We went as a group, the three of us, and similar for Jennifer here.
Yeah, I had no expectations to date whatsoever. I just went because I always wanted to go to Ireland, and to have the opportunity to go on a Catholic group was the perfect opportunity.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of General Quarters. Today we discuss a very interesting subject. We have with us today Bev Stephens from Regina. Regina is a nonprofit foundation deeply committed to educating about the history, philosophy, and culture of the Catholic Church. Now, Regina publishes an online magazine and books and organizes trips, which are crafted for young adults. So far, these trips have taken them to Italy, Sicily, Ireland, Scotland, and England. This year, Regina's first ever American trip explores the Catholic heritage of the Great Lakes, an adventure on land and sea that begins in Detroit, August 28th, and finishes in Chicago, September 5th. Now, Bev, thanks for taking the time. It's awesome to see you, as always.
Great to see you.
So what's interesting to me, about Regina, first of all, do me a favor. Tell me a little bit about Regina, and if we could, I was dying to find it because I found something that was really interesting. Whether by design or by accident, there have been a demonstrated, if not surprising, result of actually 9 marriages coming out of these types of trips. So tell me first about Regina, and let's get into that.
So Regina is a cultural, sort of Catholic cultural magazine. So the term culture actually comes from the Latin cultus, which refers to a religion. And a culture is what grows up around the religion. And one of the things I noticed as, raising kids and living in the New York area, and then later on the West Coast, and then after that in Europe for quite some time, was that the culture that you and I grew up with, the Catholic culture that surrounded us, was growing thin, like an ozone layer. And it was, I worked hard to make sure my kids had that. But it wasn't, no matter what I did, it wasn't as thick or as rich. And so I thought, how do you teach about this? How do you teach about the history and the legends and the stories and the everything, not just surrounding the saints, but also the churches and how, like food. I'm a big cook. I come from an Italian family, and it's all these things emanated from the cultus of the faith. And so I thought, I don't think about magazines. I'm just going to try it. That was back in 2013, and the day that I launched the magazine, which is a kind of a grandiose word for what I did, which was basically send an email to my contact list, and it was the day that Benedict abdicated. Right after, like an hour after I sent the email, I found out.
So that was, my memory, what year was that?
That was in March of 2013.
13. Okay, right.
I'm sorry, February of 2013.
Right. So I remember you had amassed quite a following on your, in a very short order. I think if memory serves correct, you have like 75,000 or something on Facebook. Is that right?
Yeah, that was from 2013 to 2018. So over 5 years, 4.5 years, we grew it that big. But Facebook quickly found out that we were pro-life, and they halted our growth.
Yeah.
by shadow banning, they have all kinds of tricks they use to make people drop off. They made me drop off my own page.
Lovely. Yeah,
so anyway, that was
we've
it. We were
experienced that ourselves at Lepanto. Anytime we touch the third rail with anything they don't like, and abortion's a big one. We did a real quick story with Roe v. Wade movie, Shreve down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, explain to me how, on average, we're 2,000 to 3,000 views, and that one, 700.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then we got, so I definitely get that. It's a reality of it. But I find it interesting, and I and you and I have talked in the past, and one thing I really wanted to kind of get into is because I find this really interesting. You had made reference to, and we've talked in the past, we've had great conversations. We grew up in the New York area, and the church, and we're from ethnic families, right? You're Italian, I'm Irish. That was central to the family, the community. It was. And now I would say, in all fairness, that was dissipating right before my eyes, actually. But it was still very, very much central. Today, I mean, you guys had 9 marriages, I think 3 vocations out of these trips. What a wonderful way to meet someone with similar values, because it's brutal out there.
It's just so different from when we were kids. It's for young people nowadays. It's so, and what I mean by that is that, like, we went to rock concerts. We went out to the bars. We went out dancing. We did, they can't insure rock concerts anymore, so there aren't any of those.
Right.
Going out to the bars, I mean, even pre-COVID was kind of like a crapshoot. You never knew if somebody's going to put some weird, stuff in your drink. And, there just wasn't the kind of, I remember going out in New York in the 80s, New York was pretty in the 80s, as you remember. But I went out with a couple of guys in a cab, and you could go out you'd be perfectly safe.
Sure.
That kind of stuff. It just so there's those externalities, and then there's how the culture itself has changed, where the very notion that young people might have, like, the whole, like, romance. I'm like a big proponent of romance. I think romance is something that you must have. You must have romance, because it's going to help you. That romance and the faith is going to help your marriage go through the hard times.
Great point. And that's, I think you just hit it right on the head. First of all, romance is an anachronism. I don't even think that that's even understood, especially, I think I mentioned to you, I have mentored a lot of guys in their early 20s, and I talked to them about this stuff, and they're looking at me like I have 5 heads.
Where was I? No, so the trips are different than your standard, sort of garden variety trip, because I'm taking people not just to the places that they would have, like, if you're going to go to Ireland, you will probably go, there's a good chance that you'll go to St. Patrick's Mountain.
Right.
But when you go with me to Ireland, you're going to have a Latin Mass in an abandoned abbey at the foot of St. Patrick's Mountain. And you're going to have it, and the roof's been taken off this abbey by none other than Cromwell. So and there's still the high altar up by the arched windows, and that's where we have Mass.
Well, that's a piece of history right there. I mean, and anyone of Irish descent understands who Cromwell was and how absolutely awful it was, and what that meant about taking the roof off a church like that. It was meant to hurt the people and really demoralize them.
Right, and so this is 400 years later, more than 400 years later, that we're there, and it was kind of in a strange way, having a Mass in that setting has the effect, and that's day 1 usually on an Irish trip. It has the effect of, like, uniting all the young adults on my trip, because they don't know where they are. They just sense that they're in this, like, oh my gosh, like, what's this situation that we're in? And there's an absolutely reverent Mass said the way it was said back in 1640 when Cromwell took the roof off that thing. At the foot of the mountain that they are now going to climb, and that's a serious mountain.
How
Like,
high is it?
oh, I don't know, high. Like I'm not, I would never describe myself as a mountain climber. I mean, I do like a quarter of it or a third of it, and then I go back down and sit in the pub and wait for them to come back. So, and that's sort of to my role, in this is that all I'm there to do is make sure that everything's planned and taken care of, so they don't have to worry about where am I going next, is the room paid for, what am I going to eat, like all this stuff, so they can just go and enjoy. There's a set pattern that the priest and I always notice. So we wait at the airport for everybody to come off their planes. And the people who have not been on the trips before have this look on their face like, oh no, my mother talked me into this. I'm going to spend a week with a bunch of religious nuts. Like they all look like they're going to die when they get off the plane. And a week later, on Saturday night, I'll usually leave them in the bar, and they don't want to go. They don't want to stop hanging with each other, and they finally get to bed at 4 a.m. because they are that much. They're like this by the time they leave. Oh.
Yes.
And I'm going to another wedding next month in Dallas of 2 people who met on our trips, who I believe you're going to be interviewing. That's Ed and Mariana, and they had both been on, she had been to England with me and he had been to Ireland with me, and then they both came to Scotland. And it's become, how people are, like they make friends with this one and they know the brother of that one, and then there's they become like this kind of extended gang of young people, and there's going to be 20 of them at their wedding next month.
Oh, that's just, I look, it's interesting because and thank you, by the way, because I spoke to 2 of them last night, and they said exactly what you just said. And yeah, and you could tell, I mean, it was really cool. And the thing is, as we're actually on the phone for half an hour, and we'll see them again later in the show. But one of the things I find interesting is that, unfortunately, and we've seen this slow, steady decline, you have to start out with the concept that you're taking these guys to places that were central in Western civilization, right? And you can't look at Western civilization without looking at the Roman Catholic Church. It's central to the entire narrative, right?
It's culture. It's the culture surrounding the cultist of the church.
Bingo. And my thought is, and it was interesting, I was talking to these guys, and they all said the same thing. And they said, yes, it's very, very difficult in the current environment where there is no urgency to be connected to a parish. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And I'd point to the bishops over the last decades. And they found each other through, and almost by accident on these trips, right? Now, all of a sudden, they've got somebody within their age group, and they have shared values. And by their own description, it was really moving, actually. They said that, well, as you just said, we kind of first met in England, rather in Ireland, I think, and then the next year, I think it was Scotland or something. And in Scotland, that's when they had a chance. And like what you were saying, is that's when the conversations happened till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. They went back to the United States, did not want to let that go. A lot of airplane time was spent, but a lot of romance. Exactly what you were referring to. And that's what I got out of the conversation. And so my poor daughter, who's 21, who I'm mercilessly beating up to go on this trip, because I think that even with the guys I mentor and having, a 21-year-old daughter and talking to her friends, romance is dead. The concept of shared values, because for multivariable reasons, there's no fathers in the home, all sorts of things. They have no idea what you're talking about. And so if you say, well, you really need to have shared values, then let's start with Catholicism, right? Pretty good one. In fact, it's absolutely necessary. Doesn't make it. What makes it is the same hot dogs. What's your favorite movie? None of that stuff matters. I mean, what do you think? I mean,
well, it's interesting because, okay, so, but if you say that to millennials and you say, for most of them anyway, you say, well, the shared values are Catholicism. They don't know what that means because the faith has been dumbed down so far. And they probably been raised in an environment where Catholics are they don't teach the history of the faith anymore. They don't teach, other than this sort of kumbaya, it's important to be nice thing. That they don't know what that means. They don't know what any of that means. And so if you take them to Ireland and you climb St. Patrick's Mountain, or you take them to England and you walk the trail that J.R.R. Tolkien walked every day while he was writing The Two Towers, and then you take them and then you show them Stonyhurst, which is the school that his son was teaching in, which was why he was there. This was during World War II, because it was far from London, far from the bombing, and he was safe there, and he was staying with his son, and he was writing The Two Towers. And you come around the bend, and it's this big gray stone, college, and you point up and you say, those are the two towers. Because that,
I had no idea. Is that right?
Yeah, it's true. And so, and then you take them the next day to Lancaster Prison, where they see, and the thing is, it's the old jail where they kept the recusants and they tortured them and all this other stuff. And the Brits today have no sensitivity about this whatsoever. They they're very cheerful about it. Oh, look, and we used to kick the foot, and the guy was was in a noose, and then they kicked the thing out from underneath him, and there was it's this very cheerful, oh, ye old merry old England, sort of thing. And my kids are all like, because it's like this, and then when you ask them about the recusants, they know something about it, but not much. And so the lesson that comes away from that is that not only were these people martyrs and died in awful, gruesome ways, because of the anti-Catholicism embedded in the culture, the people today have no clue. So so they learn, or when you go to Rome and you go 30 meters down under the surface into a catacombs where there's 500,000 Christians buried, aka Catholics, and you have a mass celebrated with 3 priests in English at an altar in a family tomb. The last person was buried in that tomb was in the year 300.
Wow.
So you're down there. I mean, people. So they absorb the, if you will, the romance of the faith by osmosis on these trips, and they start to realize who they are.
Wow, that's a great point, Steve. Because the other thing too is that's why
sort of like,
particularly in Europe, travel is so important. Because you have to start with the argument that Western civilization, there's a certain cultural relativity out there, and I don't think anyone can deny Western civilization who's being intellectually honest is superior in every way. The Italian law, architecture, you see what I'm saying? And all emanating from Rome, and you see this, and you wonder how this all happened. And then you have something like the Protestant Reformation, and you see the dissipation from that point. And you look at the faith of these people in retrospect, and you go back and you look at that, and I think that's got to be terribly enlightening, because you're not getting it in school, in many respects. I mean, even when I went to Catholic school, I would argue that I don't think that they're highlighting that as how important it is, and we're not even touching upon the spiritual truth of all this. You know what I mean? And I think
I think that the question of culture is something that is okay. So living in Europe, talking to a lot of young people, like I stood in front of a group of probably 30 Irish young people with Cardinal Pell about 6 years ago. And he and I spoke to them at a dinner. They were being sent to a newly founded Catholic college in Ireland. So they were ages 18, 19, 20, like that. And And I had just actually come from Ireland, where I had learned a great deal. This was way before the trips, about the famine. Like, I didn't know much about the famine.
Right.
And the potato famine, that's all you heard. And I didn't know much about it. And so when we went there, I learned a lot about it. And so I was curious to see what these kids knew. So I asked them, how many here can tell me what decade, when did the Irish potato famine happen? And there were 30 kids. 2 of them could place it roughly in the middle of the 19th century.
Right.
And I said, how could this happen? 1/4 of your population disappeared, died, or emigrated.
Yes.
Okay, inside of the years 1849 to 1853. How did this happen? So they didn't know. And then I found out why they didn't know. All I'm saying is that young people in Europe are not necessarily learning their own history.
Yes.
So at one point we were in another abbey that Cromwell had destroyed in Kerry, having a Latin mass. And we actually found out afterwards that the abbey itself was a mass rock, because we found the crosses etched into the stone where we had the mass. And we try to do these early in the morning before there's a lot of tourists or anything like that. But while at this particular mass, there were 2 tall, skinny, blonde Germans, maybe 25 years old, a guy and a girl. And I speak German, so I could understand. Like, I heard them in the back talk. They were like saying to each other, "What do you think? Is this some strange ritual? Maybe it's a cult." They had no clue what they were looking at. It was a Catholic priest in the whole, like, they were fascinated. After the mass, they approached our priest.
Wow.
And they were like, "Oh, and so is this a religion? Is this a religion here that you're doing?"
You're kidding.
No. And they were all geared up in their talk. They were like the most modern, most cool, most progressive. And like, no clue, and fascinated, absolutely fascinated. So the culture surrounding the faith is a romantic culture.
Yes,
Regardless of how it is expressed in whatever you said. You're Irish, I'm Italian. The Germans, believe it or not, there's even romance there. The French, the Polish, every place where the faith shows up, it brings this culture of romance with it. And
Wow.
And it is and all I have to do, so I'm not supervising anybody. Everybody's 20.
It came out wrong, and I almost want to pull that back, because I know you understand they're adults and everything. But was it a shock to you that the marriages came out of it, or could you? My guess is you saw this coming, like going, "Wow," when it started.
Well, no, actually, the first couple of trips, I was so trying to figure out how to do this right that I certainly wasn't paying attention to what was going on with them.
Sure.
And so when people started telling me that they had mainly I found out about it by accident on Facebook, because they'd all be connected on our Facebook pages, and I'd see these engagement pictures, and sometimes I knew the kids better, so I would they would very excitedly send me pictures and all of that. I think that it's, how do I put it? I think it's that there's no, in the wider culture, marriage, weddings, and all of that kind of stuff. This is not just in America. It's certainly in Europe as well. And
Look at the data.
it's an opportunity, 100%. It's an opportunity for a gigantic party where you show off to everybody.
Yes,
that's what it is.
Well said.
And these are so different, these weddings that I've been to. These are so one wedding was it was a Dominican rite, in Latin Mass, and then afterwards a party on the lawn out in the country at the bride's house. And all the food was homemade by her mom and her mom's friends.
Oh, beautiful.
And then another wedding was in a basilica in San Antonio, which was just absolutely lovely. And then afterwards at the Botanical Gardens, where all the kids in the I call them kids, you know, their 20s, early 30s, but they'd done all the decorating. The bride had made the cake. They had done everything as homemade as possible. And it was so much more. It was a celebration of love. It wasn't an opportunity for people to show off what they have and how beautiful they are and all this other stuff. It was a completely different atmosphere.
Gosh, that's so well said. That really is, you know, and they've turned into this vulgar societal display that you know, and you look at it and you're like, oh man, this is awful. Wow, this is wild. So, and by the way, since we're on this subject, and I also think you mentioned to me that out of these trips too, there were 3 vocations.
2 that I know of, and 1 that's a possibility. I'm not sure on that one, but one is a young lady who came with us to Italy, and I arranged for her to spend a couple of nights with the sister adorers of the Institute of Christ the King, outside Florence in an absolutely, you know, paradisical setting, and it was interesting because she came from that, and she said to me, what that experience had taught her was that she definitely had a vocation to a traditional order, but probably not them. And so then I thought, you know, so I set her up with the Marian Sisters of Santa Rosa, California, to talk to them, and I believe she's just taken her vows.
Sure.
So since I hear she's quite happy. And then the other was a young man who came with his sister from Canada, and the sister's boyfriend as well. So the dad sent the brother and sister on the trip, and the boyfriend sent himself, but the brother was there to be with his sister. So the boyfriend and the sister like fell seriously in love on this trip to Ireland and got married afterwards, and the brother went on to the seminary.
That's true. Let me tell me if you agree with this, and because we're going to wrap this up in a second. But it just seems, if I could take a step back from the outside looking into the society around me, marriage has been sort of reduced to an extenuation of this egocentrism. In other words, the reason we're getting married is because our main intention is to be happy and to increase that happiness. Now, as opposed to, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, and so that's why it's really important we like the same concerts and movies, whatever. So whereas an environment like this, where you're talking about, okay, the purpose of a Catholic marriage is to get one another into heaven, right? That requires carrying one cross. That requires doing that together. And so as opposed to searching for a life of comfort, we're talking about searching for a meaning together. That's why, you see what I mean? And so what I'm saying is that by being able to introduce people in that construct, I think you stumbled upon a wonderful formula, and I commend you for it. Well,
I think that, you know, the question of why people would stay married, like my aunts and uncles would never have thought of, like, why would we stay married? You know, that would not have been something that would have entered into, you know, in those days, the Hollywood people, you know, they went from marriage to marriage to marriage, you know, and that kind of thing. But regular people didn't do that, and they didn't think of it as something. They didn't think of it as something that was there to make them happy. It was there because they were part of a family, and the whole notion of what is a family and what are the roles of people in families, and in the West comes from the Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
And so if people don't have an understanding of what that means, so I think in some ways romance is seen as something that's ephemeral, that will just disappear. Like, so people kind of think, oh, romance, that's silly, like, that's not constant. But there's an enduring romance and I'll tell you one little story which has nothing to do with marriage, but moves right ahead to the last sacrament. So the first time we went to Ireland, we had a Dominican with us, and we went to Limerick, where the Institute of Christ the King is restoring a church which the Jesuits had sold to a spa company that was going to turn this Sacred Heart Church into a spa. But thankfully, the property crisis, the credit crunch, as they call it in the British Isles, intervened in 2008, and the plan was abandoned. And so the thing was basically worthless, and the Archdiocese handed it over to the Institute, where there's a Frenchman with the heart of a lion there now who is restoring this church. So we go to the Latin Mass there, and there's also American Dominican sisters, the real deal, that are like down the street and around the corner in Limerick. So our Dominican, after the Mass, wanted to go and see them. He goes, and we're getting the tour of the place. He comes back and he says, he's got tears in his eyes. And I'm like, you all right? He said, I can't believe what just happened to me. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, apparently there's an old tradition in Ireland that when someone dies, the family brings the body to the church.
I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, so what happens is somebody dies, and they bring the body on a gurney, and they roll it into the church, where the priest would bless the body before it would be prepared for the funeral.
Oh, okay.
As if so the fittingness of this is like, the baby's born and baptized almost immediately, brought into the church, and at the other end of life, the body is brought back to the church to be received. And the nuns, there's 4 Dominican nuns there, have been pressed into service to receive these bodies. But that's not a woman's role.
No.
That's the priest's role.
Yes.
And they said, they heard that he was there, and they were like, please, Father, please do this. And so he said, I'll have to be guided by you. Like, I don't know what they're expecting from me. And the nuns had learned, so they taught him. And he said, I just brought a Catholic home again.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
I thought,
Beautiful.
so this is what I mean by the enduring romance of the faith, which is something that is done, it accompanies us at every stage of our lives. And before we get too far off on this thing, I do want to say something else, and that is that, they have a lot of fun, and they have a lot of fun because once they get to know each other, it's like, we're going out dancing all night. And we're going they're out, like, I see them at breakfast and they look a little hungover, and I'm like, you guys, coffee. and I'm like,
Absolutely. Sorry.
that's what they want. That's what you want to be doing at that age.
Yes.
And, you should be out dancing all night, and you should be, traipsing through the fields, like we were in the Outer Hebrides outside of Scotland. So it's a 4-hour ferry ride out to the Outer Hebrides. Several of the islands on the Outer Hebrides remained Catholic throughout the Reformation. Now, that is such a startling statement, you know, because basically the Scottish Reformation was probably the harshest of them all.
Sure.
And if you tried to stay Catholic, they'd draw and quarter you. But this chain of islands, which is 4 hours by ferry now, would have been, I don't know, 2 days in a sailboat, like, you know, to get out there. So they basically left them alone. And they're really just these rocks out in the Atlantic Ocean that have small populations now. But we went out there because there's a wonderful priest, a Scottish convert priest, a brilliant guy out there. And he took us into the fields to find a 5th century monastery. So you have to imagine, we are hopping around these fields because there's piles of sheep poop everywhere, and gigantic sheep, which, by the way, had never seen people running around in the fields before. And there's a kid next to me who's from, his family is originally from Africa, but he grew up in Dallas, so he's a 100% city boy. And he's going to me, he said, "Mrs. Stephens, is like, what are we doing? Where are we going?"
Dodging the piles.
We're running through the fields, and so we finally get out there, and I'm not kidding. It was amazing. So these big black rocks, the ruins, you can still see the chapel, and some of the doors are still on it from the 400s.
Yeah, I mean, wow.
Built by Saint Columba, who came over with his Irish monks, because it's not that far from Ireland to the Outer Hebrides of Scotland.
Right.
And they built this thing. And he had us singing in ancient Gaelic.
Wow.
And I got the video to prove it.
Bev, that a tremendous story. Could you tell us, listen, if somebody is interested, I'm hoping this video goes to a lot of people. Can you tell us how do we find out more about this? I know I've got it at the bottom of the screen. Tell me how, you know, what's the process? Just let's close it up by tell me a little bit about how they can get in touch with you and that kind of thing.
Well, this year we're doing our first American trip to the Great Lakes. We're going to be starting out in Detroit, ending in Chicago. And we're going to be taking a 4-hour ferry ride across Lake Michigan, among other things. And so it's basically, we need 10 people before we can do a trip.
Okay.
And we take a maximum of 20. Because I can't really handle more than 20. and it's not a mass trip thing. It's not like, you know, mass tourism. It's really much more, you know, personal than that. So if they're interested in coming, they should send us an email or look on www.reginamag.com or find us on Regina Magazine on Facebook or MeWe. And we have, you know, all the information about cost, and we stay in places, just to be clear, people who are in their 20s and early 30s often don't have a lot of money to spare to travel with. So we respect that. And so we stay in places, usually, I try to look for that balance of atmospheric with cost.
Fair enough.
So we stay in Europe, we stay in convents, and we stay in family-run hotels, and we stay in agriturismos. And here we're going to be staying in retreat houses, and then a friend has owns a golf course with a bunch of townhouses on it that he's going to let us have the townhouses. So you know, we're doing it. So this is not, Americans shouldn't expect that it's going to be like, oh, we're going to stay in the Holiday Inn Express. And like it's going to be more of a, like, it's fun, but it's not luxury.
Sure.
So it's that kind of thing.
Charming. Actually, it sounds kind of charming, all of it. I mean, you know, the way you describe it. And, you know, in the course of meeting you, that other people have talked about these trips, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's a great time. And again,
we do get questions, just to be clear, we do get questions from older people that would like to go on the trips as well. And I have to be, you know, I have to be frank about it. So of course, if people over 35 want to come on the trips, they're very welcome to do so. There's no doubt about it. I do want them to realize that it's a lot of hiking and biking and swimming and, you know, all of this kind of, they don't have to participate in every single thing. I certainly don't go all the way to the top of St. Patrick's Mountain.
Right.
But there is a fair amount of energy level required, you know, to do it. And it's also you know, I've had people ask, can they bring kids on these trips? And I say, you know, 13 and up, you could probably get away with it because they wouldn't be too bored. But under 13 would be tough because, you know, you're walking through churches, you know, you're like, you know, all the grown-ups want to stand around and talk, you know, like, you know, it's that kind of thing. So it is geared to the 21 to 35 age group kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, people would just, you know, have to understand that. Plus, you know, as I said, I think you stumbled upon a great formula, and you know, proof's been. I mean, I've heard nothing but great things about your trips, and they certainly look really interesting. But I think it's wonderful, and I think we're going to wrap it up there. And actually, a little later in the show, very shortly, we're gonna actually talk to a few people who went on this trip. And Bev Stephens from Regina, I want to thank you for taking the time. This was really cool. And
thank you so much. Thanks,
all right, so we're going to be back. We're going to be back to general quarters after this brief break, and we're going to interview some people who actually went on these trips. And we'll talk to you guys soon. We'll be back. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, I think that the current environment is very difficult. I mentor a lot of young people. I have a daughter who's 21. And, you know, I speak to a lot of people in their 20s and 30s. I think the current environment is a very difficult one for which to date. And this, to me, just as, you know, as Bev had even told me, was very surprising. But tell me a little bit about the experience and what happened to you guys just I think you framed it as courtship versus dating. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Well, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's when you're looking out around you and you have these people you've grown up with in your community, the way one of my friends put it is, it's a lot like brothers and sisters around you. You don't really think of them as dating material, for one. For two, you kind of know them in a certain way, and let's just say you don't always know whether or not they're the types of people you want to go with in the long run. And if it's a smaller Catholic community you grow up around you.
Sure.
When you run into Catholics in a more general atmosphere, but at the same time, you know that they're a specific type of Catholic. You can tell by the fact that they took time off of work. They put the money into going on this trip for several weeks.
Wow, great point.
You know they're going to be a specific type of Catholic. And then you have this time with them just going and experiencing, like I was saying, this side of your Catholic heritage. And it's just this relaxed atmosphere where you get to see them as who they are, not in a, you know, dating website kind of situation where you feel like you have to figure out right away, you know, do you click with this person? So you have lots of interactions, lots of chances basically to get to see this person. Sometimes they're going to be a little more clammed up. Sometimes they're going to be a little more open. You know, sometimes you go to the pub and you have a drink and then a lot more relaxed, a lot more themselves. And, or you're up climbing Croagh Patrick and you got, you know, Father next to you and you got Bev behind you and everybody's just talking about their upbringing and just, it comes out naturally. You know, who you are, you know, where you came from, what your family's like. Those things just come out really in a relaxed way that really isn't easy when you try to set up, if you try to like go on, you know, a Catholic dating website or something like that. It's just
great point.
A lot of tension.
Right. And everybody who is actually on this trip, there's a presumption that they are ardent Catholics, actually. And you know what's interesting? You bring something up that I absolutely love. I hear young people talk, sometimes, you know, people again in their 20s and 30s, and they talk about things like, you know, the important things like what concerts we like in movies. And the reality is that, you know, people who are actually thinking correctly and a little deeper understand that marriages are made to start out, you need the same values. And that's what this is. I think it's a great story. I've had an opportunity to speak to a bunch of you guys, and I just think it's wonderful. And the truth is, I have a daughter who's 21, and I'm trying to get her to go on this, and not for the reasons to get her pushed into marriage. That's not my intent. I think you want to hang with these people. These are people you want to meet, you know. But that's all. That's about the end of it. I just want to get a couple of questions in there, and we got like 3 people, and Bev's going to be about a half hour, so we're kind of done taping. And I can't thank you guys enough. And by the way, I want to commend you because this is really true. Everybody I talk to who has been involved in this process are stunningly normal people. So anyway, welcome you guys, and thanks for showing up today. Really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
you bet. So I think first, I love your story because it was a gradual relationship, the kind of thing where you guys met, had fun, and then a year later, I think it was, you met on another trip. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, we met in Scotland. What year was that?
2019.
And that was we actually had a good time on that trip. Ended the trip actually nicely on my birthday.
Yeah.
And got to have a good time meeting new friends. And Mariana was one of those. And about a year later, we met in St. Louis. Was it?
A few months later, we met in St. Louis, and then a few months later, we saw each other again in San Antonio.
And after San Antonio, I started messaging a little bit more promptly, and that was right before COVID, actually.
Yes.
And with the lockdown, I decided to take a road trip to Texas and ask Mariana out. And from there, and we went to Virginia. And
first 2 days of dating, we're in a car.
On a
road trip.
And visiting my sister and my brother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how quick it went, pretty much.
Yeah.
But San Antonio is where we met a bunch of our friends from my first trip in Ireland and our Scotland trip as well, kind of a combination.
Yeah.
Which we met another now married couple expecting Alex and Aurelia.
Oh, is that right? And they're expecting, and they're with child. That's tremendous. You know, if you can speak to this, I speak to people in their 20s and 30s quite often, and I hear a little bit about the current environment with social media and sort of the hookup culture, coupled with, marriage and childbirth at an all-time low in the United States. It seems difficult for these guys to consider marrying or meeting anyone. It's multivariable, of course, but family life and marriage have got this really bad name. And frankly, the results, by the way, are awful. That's a whole nother show. Half of the children are born out of wedlock, and it's slightly better or worse, depending on your ethnic group. My point is, you guys go on a trip. You're around a lot of people, approximately your own age. You share similar values, and, speak to that if you could a little bit.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, actually, the range went from somebody of 21, just actually, Edward was turning 21 on the trip. And we did celebrate a little bit with him. And I think the oldest, was it Mary? A little bit older than us.
So maybe in their mid 30s, but it was a nice range of people, and think it helped though that everybody was able to roll with the punches and just figure, or just kind of go with all the mishaps, because
right. I would think that would be such a positive, because one of the things you look for when you date with somebody, when you're dating somebody, is, well, how are they going to handle things? Because when you have those short dates, right? You don't really get to test the theory.
Yeah.
2 weeks on the road in another country, you're going to test that theory pretty quick.
Yes,
it's good to see them interacting with others as well.
That helps.
Right.
Exactly. Interacting with all sorts of life, new people. And you got to see me interacting with some people I've already known, and some new people. I made a really good friendship with another fellow who's out in Baltimore, and he'll be coming out here for the wedding.
And,
that's great. By the way, when is the wedding?
July 16th.
A month from today, we just realized, we're like, oh, wow.
That's fantastic.
Yes, we're excited.
Really is. By the way, did you guys, I'm sorry, you told me this, if I did, forgive me. You met and actually, kind of talked a little more in Scotland, or did you meet in Ireland, or which one was it, or England? I forget.
With Scotland.
Right. The first trip was what?
So we both met Beverly on separate trips. I met Beverly in England.
And I met Beverly in Ireland.
But we both enjoyed the trips we did initially so much that we're like, we both wanted to go to Scotland. And
I love it. Right.
Yeah. So Scotland was the second Regina trip we both went on.
That's true. And you guys, and she was telling me like Bev goes to all these weddings, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, she's oh my goodness.
Yeah, so
see what she does next.
She's a riot, actually. It was so great to interview her. Right, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to, and I really want to thank you guys. I just wanted to, bring somebody on. Actually, this is really, it's actually worked. And Bev was telling us a little bit today. She was telling me a little bit today about the Ireland trip, where, all of a sudden you guys are at a monastery where, Cromwell ripped off the roof, and you're having mass at some quite, 400-year-old altar or something. I forget when Cromwell was in. But I mean, I find this whole thing kind of fascinating. And, especially because, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, the state of marriage and family, this is the way, I think, this is the way to what a great way to meet people in an organic setting, and nobody gets, and from what I gather, you guys seem like lovely people and, terribly normal. And these things are organic. Like nobody's showing up to this thing awkward, like they're trying to hook me up. There's none of that.
That's very nice.
And that's super important because I mean, nobody wants to feel like there's these machinations behind the scenes. And I'm going to say my goodbyes here. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Sure, thank you for having us.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Thanks for having us on.
100%. You got to come back, and we're going to bring you guys back on. But I'm just going to do a quick message to the folks in the audience. And again, we can't do this without your support, guys. So make certain you hit the subscribe and like button and hit the bell to be notified of new content. And remember our online store and Lepanto Sacred Heart Cross, which, by the way, would make a wonderful gift for your wedding party, by the way, which you can get at LepantoCatholicGifts.com. I just think that would be a fabulous one. Sterling silver, beautiful. Lastly, consider donating at lepantoin.org/donate. That's lepantoin.org/donate. If you can give some of your hard-earned money, we promise to continue being good stewards of your money, and we'll be grateful. Anyway, we're going to thank you again, and this is Jim Bowen at the Lepanto Institute saying goodbye from General Quarters. Until next time, God bless. We want to thank you, Edward and Mariana, and it was awesome to get to know you a little bit. And we'll
thank you.
Best of luck next month, and we'll bring you back on.
Thank you.
All right, you bet. Bye, guys.